https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=e1ijadic7_3e. Transcript. Ryan says you're not worth more than that sandwich you're holding. She laughed. He said nothing. 3 months later, he fired them both. But what she never knew, what nobody in that room knew, the man she was humiliating in a warehouse break room already owned the building they were standing in. Jamal Brooks was 34 years old, and he believed quietly, genuinely believed that a man's worth was by how he showed up, not by what he wore when he did. He wasn't rich. He drove a 2016 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a passenger window that stuck every time it rained. But he was present. He was faithful. And every single morning, he laced up his steel-toed boots and went to work. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Atlanta, his wife walked into his break room with his boss on her arm and handed him a divorce envelope like she was returning a library book. She didn't even take off her sunglasses. What she didn't know, sitting in Jamal's car, in a plain white envelope he'd nearly thrown away 3 days earlier, was a letter that was about to make Ryan Hargrove's corner office feel very, very small. But we'll get to that. If you've ever loved someone completely and been made to feel like it still wasn't enough, stay with me. This one is for you. Atlanta, a Tuesday 10:47 in the morning. The Hargrove Logistics warehouse sits off Fulton Industrial Boulevard, just past a rust-colored overpass nobody has repainted since the 90s. Big, gray, mostly cheerless. It smells like motor oil and cardboard and burned coffee from the break room at the end of the hall. In summer, the loading dock gets so hot you can feel the asphalt breathing through your boot soles. Jamal had been here 4 years, 4 years of 10-hour shifts, sometimes 12. 4 years of lifting and stacking and sweating through his uniform before 8 o'clock in the morning. His hands were calloused. His back ached by noon on a good day. He never complained. Not once. Not to anyone. Because that simply wasn't who Jamal Brooks was. He was the guy who quietly helped new hires find the rhythm of the loading belt before the floor supervisor noticed they were struggling. He was the one who covered a shift when Marcus needed to take his mother to her chemotherapy appointment. Solid. Unannounced about it. That kind of man. That Tuesday, he'd been on the floor since 6 a.m. His uniform was damp with sweat. The ache in his lower back had settled into that familiar heavy pulse that meant overtime was already decided. He walked down the hall to the break room. Not for coffee. Just for the cheapest turkey sandwich in the vending machine. $2.15. Enough fuel to push through another 4 hours. He dug through coins out of his pocket and punched in the number. That's when he heard the heels. Sharp. Deliberate. The kind of heels that were never meant for a warehouse floor. The door swung open. Keisha walked in first. Red lips. Chanel bag on her arm. A silk blouse that probably cost more than Jamal's last 2 paychecks combined. She looked dressed for a celebration. Not an industrial break room on a Tuesday morning. Behind her, hands loose in the pockets of a charcoal Armani suit, was Ryan Hargrove, Vice President of Hargrove Logistics, Jamal's boss. Tall, groomed, wearing that smile, the kind that assumes the room already agrees with him. Jamal went still. Keisha set a manila envelope on the cold stainless steel table. Her wedding ring hit the surface with a sharp little click. A sound so small and somehow so final that Jamal would hear it in the back of his mind for weeks afterward. Jamal. Her voice was smooth, composed, clearly rehearsed. I can't stay with a man who's going to be stuck in a warehouse forever. Ryan can give me a real life. She let the moment sit. Then she added the part designed to leave a mark. Ryan told me you're not worth more than that sandwich in your hand. Ryan smiled. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Jamal looked at them both. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. The sandwich was still in his hand. He stood there in his oil-stained boots and sweat-damp uniform, looking at two people who were absolutely certain they had already won. In his mind, briefly, he saw his daughter, 7 years old, ponytails, a gap where her front tooth used to be. She'd been waiting at her grandmother's house since the weekend. She liked to sit on the porch steps and count how many birds landed in the yard before his car turned the corner. He thought about the nights Keisha had come home late, smelling like somewhere else. The unusual deposits in their joint account she'd explained with half sentences. The way she'd started using the word unambitious. Slowly at first, then as though it were simply a fact. He thought about all of that in roughly 3 seconds. Then Keisha said, almost gently, "Our daughter deserves a successful father, not a laborer." And Jamal gave the faintest smile. Just the corner of his mouth. A smile nobody in the room could interpret because nobody in the room knew what he knew. He knew about the envelope in his car. The one from the attorney. The one he had almost thrown away. Sometimes the most painful moment is the exact moment your life begins to change direction. Pain doesn't always arrive to break you. Sometimes it arrives to wake you up. What was inside that envelope, and why it had everything to do with the man standing behind Keisha, is exactly what comes next. Before we go on, I need to ask you something. If your husband had been humiliated like this, standing there in his work uniform, holding a $2 sandwich, while his wife laughed at him with another man, would you have walked away quietly or said something right then and there? Drop a yes if you would have spoken up, or no if you would have done exactly what Jamal did. I'm genuinely curious. Let me know in the comments. 2 days after the divorce papers were signed, Jamal sat alone in his Civic and finally opened the envelope. He'd almost tossed it. It had the look of something from an insurance company. Thick, official, self-important. His name typed in clean serif font on the front. Return address. Hayes & Associates, LLC. Estate Law. Atlanta, Georgia. He tore it open slowly. The way you open something you're not entirely sure you want to know. Attorney Malcolm Hayes had written 3 pages. Jamal read the first paragraph twice. Then he set the letter on the passenger seat and stared through the windshield at the CVS parking lot across the street for a long, quiet moment. His uncle Reginald was gone. Reginald Brooks. The man Jamal had known his whole life as a quiet, modest figure who lived in a small house in Decatur, drove a 10-year-old Buick, waved off any conversation about money at Sunday dinners. Gone. 12 days ago. And he had left Jamal everything. Not some things. Everything. $520 million. And full controlling ownership. 68% of a company called Brooks Capital Holdings. Jamal had never heard that name before. He turned the page. Malcolm had included a corporate structure diagram. Subsidiaries. Holding companies. Shell entities layered deep. Each one obscuring what was underneath. And there, at the bottom of one branch, was a name Jamal knew very well. Hargrove Logistics. He read it twice to be certain. Brooks Capital Holdings is the parent company of Hargrove Logistics. He sat with that for a while. Then he let out a slow, long breath and looked up at the gray afternoon sky through his cracked windshield. He thought about Sunday dinners, that old Buick, his uncle's habit of listening more than he spoke, and the one thing he said most often. My nephew needs to understand what a worker's sweat smells like before he ever holds power over one. Jamal had always assumed that was just the kind of thing a certain generation of men said. Turns out, it had been a plan all along. He met Malcolm the following week. A quiet diner off Peachtree. Corner booth. The kind of place where nobody hurried you. Malcolm was 68, gray at the temples, glasses he kept pushing back up the bridge of his nose. He had the calm, deliberate manner of a man who'd spent decades in rooms where precision mattered. He confirmed everything in the letter, and then some. Reginald had built Brooks Capital over 40 years, deliberately, through companies that couldn't be traced back to him. He'd wanted it that way. He had told Malcolm once, near the end, money doesn't make a man great. What he does with it does. Jamal nodded. He didn't celebrate. He didn't make calls. He drove back to his cousin Darnell's couch, where he'd been sleeping since the divorce. Sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark, and did what he always did when the ground shifted beneath him. He thought carefully. 3 days later, he drove out to see his daughter. She was staying at Keisha's mother's house, Miss Diane's place in Marietta, with the creaky porch swing and the wind chime that had been hanging by the front door since before Jamal had ever visited. His daughter was in the backyard in a yellow dress, drawing something large and ambitious on the sidewalk with a fat piece of chalk. When she spotted his car, she dropped everything and ran. "Daddy!" He caught her and held on a few seconds longer than usual. She smelled like sunscreen and grape juice and something that was entirely, irreducibly her. He pressed his face into her hair. When he pulled back, she looked up at him with those big, patient eyes. 7 years old and already more perceptive than most adults gave her credit for. And she said, carefully, "Daddy, why does Mama say you don't amount to anything?" Children deliver the hardest lines without meaning to. They're just reporting what they've heard. Jamal didn't flinch, not outwardly, but something moved through his chest, fast and quiet, like a door closing somewhere deep. He pulled her close again, right there in the backyard, with the chalk drawings in the Georgia afternoon sun cutting through the oak trees. His tears came silently, the way they always did, private and contained. "Baby girl," his voice dropped low, "I'm going to show you something. What a man is worth has nothing to do with where he works. You'll understand that soon." She nodded seriously, the way children do when they sense that something important is being handed to them, even if they can't yet name what it is. He stayed for 2 hours, pushed her on the porch swing, read her a chapter of the book they'd been slowly working through since spring. When he left, she stood at the gate and waved until his car rounded the corner. He didn't check the rearview mirror. He wasn't ready for that. Back in the car, Jamal pulled out his phone. Keisha's Instagram was public. She had posted a short video, laughing, holding up her left hand to show off a diamond solitaire that caught the light extravagantly. Ryan's arm visible at the frame's edge. The caption already typed out beneath it, "Finally living the life I deserve." Jamal watched for about 20 seconds. Then he placed the phone face down on the seat, counted forward in his calendar, and said quietly to the empty car, "Enjoy it." 87 days. He called Malcolm the next morning. He didn't tell Darnell, didn't tell his mother, didn't tell a single person at the warehouse. He went back to work every day, laced up the same boots, clocked in at the same time, nodded at the same people, because nothing had changed yet on the surface. And Jamal was not a man who moved before he was ready. Malcolm, meanwhile, moved quietly through the company's internal records. What he assembled over the following 6 weeks was not surprising in its nature, but devastating in its detail. Ryan Hargrove had been systematically embezzling from Hargrove Logistics for 4 years. $14 million routed through falsified vendor contracts and inflated equipment invoices he'd personally approved. He had cut the warehouse safety budget 3 times in 30 months, reductions that contributed directly to 2 unreported floor accidents and 1 serious injury that never appeared in any official OSHA filing. He had buried the reports himself. And for the past 8 months, Ryan had been making regular cash transfers to an account Jamal recognized the moment he saw the number. Keisha's. Not gifts. Not loans. 8 months of payments. The affair had started well before she'd set that envelope on the break room table. Jamal read through Malcolm's full report on a Wednesday morning, at the same diner, same corner booth. He read every page without rushing. When he finished, he stacked the papers neatly, slid them back into the folder, and said, "Tell me about the workers. The ones who were hurt." Malcolm set down his coffee. "One man in particular, Earl Simmons, injured 18 months ago. A safety cage that should have been replaced wasn't. His shoulder has never fully recovered." Ryan had the incident report suppressed. "Earl has been covering his own medical bills ever since." Jamal was quiet for a moment. "I want his address." He visited Earl Simmons the following Saturday. One-bedroom apartment in College Park. Earl opened the door carefully, still favoring his left side. He looked at Jamal with the cautious recognition of a man who didn't quite trust why his warehouse colleague was standing on his porch. Jamal shook his hand and held out an envelope. "Your medical bills, all of them. Every statement, every outstanding balance, taken care of." Earl stared at it. "Why?" "Because what happened to you wasn't an accident." Jamal's voice was steady, plain. "It was a choice someone made, and it was the wrong one." He left before Earl could say more. He wasn't there for the gratitude. The following Monday, Jamal walked into Ryan Hargrave's office, set his badge on the desk, and said, "I'm resigning, effective immediately." Ryan leaned back in his chair, that familiar smile spreading across his face. "Well, took you long enough to figure out you don't belong here." Jamal looked at him for one still, unhurried moment. Then he walked out and pulled the door gently shut behind him. No scene. No last word. He didn't need one. Not yet. There is a particular kind of strength that looks exactly like nothing to everyone watching. Preparation is invisible. Patience, from the outside, looks like surrender. But the people who are truly dangerous are the ones who go quiet. Not because they've given up, but because they're almost ready. In exactly 90 days, a boardroom door would open in downtown Atlanta, and Ryan Hargrave's certainty about who he was, and who Jamal wasn't, was going to collapse in front of an audience on the 90th day. Jamal put on a black suit, not borrowed, not rented, not the one from his own wedding years ago. A new one, clean, well-fitted. No designer label required to make it mean something. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusted the collar, took one breath. He drove himself to the Brooks Capital Holdings headquarters on Peachtree Center Avenue. Arrived 14 minutes early. Sat in the marble lobby and watched Atlanta move through the glass wall. People with coffee cups and briefcases. Everyone in motion. Everyone certain that what they were running toward mattered enormously. Jamal wasn't running anywhere. Malcolm met him at 8:55, navy suit, glasses, the same composed energy he always carried. He looked at Jamal briefly and said, "Ready?" "Been ready." They took the elevator to the 14th floor. The quarterly board meeting had been on the calendar for weeks. The conference room was long and glass-walled, mahogany table that seated 20, a projector screen anchoring the far end. 8 of the 12 board members were already settled in when Jamal and Malcolm stepped through the door. Coffee cups, laptops, notepads, the comfortable routine of people who weren't expecting anything unusual. Ryan Hargrave was already there. He sat near the head of the table in that charcoal Armani leather portfolio open in front of him, projecting the easy authority of a man who considers a room his until someone proves otherwise. He was mid-laugh with the CFO beside him when the door opened. He glanced up. He saw Jamal, his chin lifted. Something flickered behind his eyes. Then he laughed. Not a surprised laugh, a contemptuous one, designed to let the room know immediately how this newcomer should be categorized. He pointed across the table like someone identifying a wrong answer on a quiz. "Hey, warehouse boy, you lost? Maintenance is 2 floors down." A couple of people at the table smiled uneasily. The CFO set down his pen. Jamal walked to the empty chair at the head of the table, pulled it out, sat down. Ryan's smile thinned. Excuse me, that seat is Malcolm Hayes stood up. The room went quiet the way rooms do just before something irreversible happens. Ladies and gentlemen, Malcolm's voice was measured, unhurried. Allow me to formally introduce Mr. Jamal Brooks, the new chairman and controlling shareholder of Brooks Capital Holdings, holding 68% of all issued shares, effective as of 30 days ago. For a moment, nothing happened. That is the particular nature of genuine shock. It doesn't make noise right away. It just settles into the room like a heavy fog while everyone's mind scrambles to catch up with what their ears just received. Ryan laughed again, louder this time, looking around the table, searching for someone to be in on it with him. Okay, that's his hands spread wide, still grinning. This is a joke, right? Malcolm placed a folder in front of him without a word. Corporate transfer filings, ownership documentation. Reginald Brooks's signature on every critical page, notarized and clean. Ryan's grin left slowly, the way color drains from a face when the body begins to understand something the mind is still rejecting. He looked at the documents. He looked at Jamal. He looked back at the documents. His throat moved. 3 seconds passed. Then Jamal opened his own folder, picked up the presentation remote, pressed a button. The projector screen lit up. The first slide was a spreadsheet, detailed, organized, 4 years' worth of falsified vendor invoices, each one approved by Ryan Hargrove, each one routing funds into shell accounts Malcolm had traced back to Ryan's personal holdings. $14,240,000. The second slide was a timeline. Internal safety inspection reports cross-referenced with the official OSHA filing queue, showing clearly, in plain columns, which reports had been submitted and which had been quietly removed before they became part of the public record. Nobody at the table was looking at Ryan anymore. They were looking at the screen. Jamal pressed play on an audio file. Ryan's own voice filled the conference room, relaxed, easy, recorded during an internal management call he had clearly never imagined would be saved. Look, they're warehouse workers. Most of them don't know their rights. Half of them won't file complaints. They're replaceable. Fire whoever you need to. It doesn't matter. The silence that followed was total. Not the silence of people waiting for more, the silence of people who have just watched something structural collapse. The female board member who had been with the company for 11 years quietly placed both hands flat on the table and looked straight ahead. Ryan's hand was pressed against his leather portfolio. His coffee had gone untouched. The easy confidence that had filled the room 20 minutes earlier was simply gone. Not diminished, gone, as if it had never been there at all. He looked at Jamal directly for the first time since the laughter had stopped. You can't just. He stopped. His fingers tightened on the portfolio. I built this division from nothing. You sat in a warehouse and moved boxes. You have no idea what it takes to. Ryan. Jamal's voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. You embezzled $14 million from this company over 4 years. You suppressed accident reports that left real people paying for real injuries with money they didn't have. You recorded yourself dismissing the workers in this building as expendable. A pause. That's what you built. Ryan stood up. His chair scraped back sharply. You don't have the authority. He has 68% of the company. Malcolm's patience was somehow more cutting than anger would have been. He has all the authority. Ryan looked at the board members. Not one of them held his gaze. Effective immediately. Jamal's tone unchanged. Mr. Hargrove's employment is terminated across Hargrove Logistics and all affiliated companies under Brooks Capital. No severance package. His building access is revoked as of this moment. The complete audit documentation has been submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta. 2 security officers appeared in the doorway. Ryan looked at them. He looked at the table. Then he straightened his jacket, the instinctive, Automatic gesture of a man reaching for the last thing that still makes him feel like himself. He picked up his portfolio, walked toward the door with whatever composure he could assemble. As he passed the head of the table, he stopped. Whether it was to say something or simply because his legs needed a moment was hard to tell. Jamal looked up at him. "You told my wife I wasn't worth more than a $2 sandwich." His voice was even. No satisfaction in it. No cruelty. Just the plain, permanent fact of it. "I want you to know that I thought about that every single day for 90 days. Not because it hurt me, but because it reminded me to keep moving." Ryan said nothing. He walked through the door. The elevator down the hall chimed. The doors opened and closed. The room stayed quiet for another moment. Then one of the board members, a man named Arthur, who had been with Reginald Brooks's companies for over 2 decades, cleared his throat gently and said, "Welcome, Mr. Brooks." A few others nodded. One said simply, "Long overdue." Jamal looked around the table. "Let's talk," he said, "about what this company is going to look like going forward." And they did. Later, weeks later, after the story had spread through Atlanta's business community and people were repeating the details the way people do with events that feel like justice made audible, someone on that board would tell a journalist that what struck them most wasn't the audit figures or the recordings or even the precision of the legal case Malcolm had built. It was the fact that throughout the entire meeting, Jamal Brooks had never once raised his voice. There's a particular kind of power that announces itself with volume and posture and expensive suits. And then there's the other kind, the kind that walks into a room quietly, takes a seat, and simply tells the truth. One of those disappears when the money runs out. The other one doesn't. But what happened in that boardroom was only half the story. Because by that same evening, Jamal's phone was ringing with a call he had not prepared himself for, from a woman who finally understood exactly what she had thrown away. Jamal was still in the building at 7:30 that evening. The board members had left hours earlier. The cleaning crew was working its way through the floor. Jamal sat at the long conference table alone. A legal pad beside him going through HR files, wages, incident records, old complaints that had been quietly set aside during Ryan's tenure. There was a great deal of ground to cover and he wasn't in a hurry to stop. He was on his 3rd cup of break room coffee when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Kesha. He sat with it through 2 full rings. His jaw tightened slightly. Then he answered. "Jamal." Her voice was stripped of everything the break room version had carried. No composure. No rehearsal. No smooth certainty. This was a different register entirely. Smaller. Fractured at the edges. The voice of someone who had been crying and was trying not to start again. "Please. I need you to hear me." He said nothing. He waited. "The baby." The word broke slightly in her throat. "Ryan is saying it's not his. He told his lawyers he never wanted it. That I misrepresented. That she stopped." He could hear her working to steady herself. "He's gone. Jamal. He moved out last week. His attorneys called yesterday. They're contesting any paternity claim. He's not answering my calls. He's Kesha." His voice was level. Not warm. Not cold. Just present. She stopped. "How far along are you?" A pause. 3 months. He stood up from the table and walked to the window. Atlanta below him. Evening coming down. Street lights flickering on. Traffic thinning. The city settling into its slower nighttime rhythm. 3 months. He calculated it without intending to. The affair had begun well before she'd placed that envelope on the break room table. She had been 3 months into building a different life before she had even told him the old one was finished. He had suspected as much from Malcolm's records. Seeing it confirmed in the timeline was one thing. Hearing the consequence of it in her voice was another. Jamal. She said quietly. I know what you're thinking. Do you? A long pause, then that I brought this on myself. He turned away from the window, sat back down. He thought about his daughter. The chalk drawing in the backyard. The yellow dress. The gap-toothed smile. He thought about what it meant that this child unborn and uninvolved was going to grow up with a half-sibling it had never asked for. In circumstances created entirely by adult choices. Children didn't author any of this. They just inherited it. He thought about his uncle Reginald, who had told him once over a quiet Sunday dinner years ago. Nephew. The true test of a man's character isn't how he treats people who've been good to him. It's what he does when every reasonable part of him says he owes them nothing. Jamal exhaled slowly through his nose. I'm not going to help you get Ryan back, he said. That chapter is done. I know. But the child didn't do anything wrong. He was careful with the next words, choosing them deliberately. You're going to need strong legal representation. Malcolm can refer you to someone he trusts. A family law attorney who will actually fight for you. Not out of anything that was between us, Kesha. Because that baby deserves protection that has nothing to do with what you and I went through. She was quiet for a long moment. Then very softly. I had you completely wrong. He could have said many things. He had in weaker moments over the past 3 months rehearsed a few of them in the car on the way home from the warehouse. But standing at the window of a building he now owned, his boots still on, his legal pad full of notes on workers who deserved better. None of those rehearsed lines felt necessary anymore. You didn't have me wrong because I was poor, he said. You had me wrong because you decided a person's value could be read from their job title. That's a harder thing to correct than a bank balance. She didn't respond immediately. He wasn't certain she fully heard it yet. Some things need time to land. He ended the call. Set the phone on the table. Sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes before going back to the files. What Kesha didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that 2 months before the divorce was finalized, while he was still sleeping on Darnell's couch and going to work every morning in the same uniform, Jamal had done something deliberate and quiet. He had purchased a house. 3 bedrooms. A good school district. A backyard with a mature magnolia tree that bloomed white in early spring. He had put the property into a trust in his daughter's name. Legally structured so that no court proceeding, no custody dispute, no future financial turbulence could touch it. It was hers. Set aside. Permanent. Her bedroom was painted a specific shade of dusty lavender. She had pointed to it in a home goods catalog 8 months earlier. Completely in passing. While they were waiting at the dentist's office. That one. Daddy. That one. He had taken a photo of the page. He hadn't told Kesha about the house. Hadn't announced it to Malcolm or Darnell or anyone. It wasn't a gesture that needed an audience. He drove past it sometimes. After visits with his daughter. Just to see the porch light come on at dusk. He called Malcolm the next morning about the attorney referral for Kesha. Malcolm was quiet on the line for a moment after Jamal explained. Then. You understand you have no legal obligation here. I know that. Most men in your position would feel justified in simply stepping back. I'm not interested in what's justified. Jamal said. I'm interested in what's right. There was a pause on Malcolm's end. Not disagreement. Consideration. Then. I'll make the call this afternoon. What Jamal didn't say out loud, because Malcolm already understood it, was that this wasn't forgiveness. Not entirely. Not yet. Forgiveness was something he was working toward in the slow, honest way you work toward anything real. It wasn't a switch. It was a daily decision. And some days it came easier than others. But a child was coming into the world without having chosen any part of this situation. And in Jamal's understanding of what a person owed the world, the innocent didn't carry the debts of the guilty. Not if he could do anything about it. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Kesha packed up the apartment she had shared with Ryan. His name was already off the lease. His belongings were already gone. Taken efficiently. Leaving behind the particular hollowness of a space where someone decided they no longer wanted to be. She stood in the living room with a flat box and a roll of packing tape, and looked at the shelves where his things had been. She thought about the break room, the envelope on the cold table, the ring hitting the steel surface, the expression on Jamal's face. Not devastated, not angry, just clear. The look of a man who already held some information she didn't. She understood it now. She had walked into that room certain she was trading up. She had looked at Jamal in his sweat-stained uniform holding a $2 sandwich. And she had seen the ceiling of his life. She had been so confident in that reading that she hadn't paused for a moment to consider whether she might be wrong. She loaded the boxes into her car. Called her mother to say she was coming home. Miss Diane didn't say "I told you so." She just said, "I'll have the guest room ready." There are people who move through life making quick certain judgments about what others are worth. And those judgments feel so obvious, so self-evident in the moment, that they think to question them. The tragedy isn't that they're sometimes wrong. The tragedy is how long it takes to understand what the error actually cost. Not money. Not status. The thing you cannot replace once it's gone. The trust of a person who had every reason to be bitter and chose not to be. And what Jamal did next, not for himself, not for justice, but for the hundreds of people who had never been the story. That is the part of this that will stay with you longest. The federal case against Ryan Hargrove moved quickly. Malcolm had submitted the complete audit package to the U.S. Attorney's Office the same afternoon as the board meeting. By the following Monday, Ryan's personal and corporate accounts had been frozen. By the end of the month, a federal grand jury had returned an indictment on 4 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of securities fraud, and 3 separate OSHA violations. The kind that carry real consequences when there is a paper trail spanning 4 years. Corroborated by internal communications and a recorded management call, Ryan's legal team filed 3 motions in the first 6 weeks alone challenging evidence collection procedures and the admissibility of the audio recording. None of it held. Malcolm had been meticulous and the U.S. Attorney's Office had more than enough to proceed. Ryan Hargrove was convicted on 6 of the 7 counts. The sentence was 7 years. The Armani suits, the corner office, the easy authority, all of it gone. Replaced by a courtroom, a number, and a room he didn't choose. His own mother released a short written statement to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution the week the verdict came down. She said she was ashamed. She said the workers her son had treated as disposable deserved better. And she hoped the outcome gave their families some measure of peace. It was brief and plainly written and clearly cost her something. Jamal read it at his kitchen table, a real table now, in his own apartment, and felt something unexpected. A quiet sorrow for her, not for Ryan, for a mother reconciling the child she'd raised with the man he had become. 6 weeks before the verdict, Jamal had contacted Patricia Webb at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution directly. Patricia had covered labor and workplace issues in Atlanta for 15 years. She was thorough and fair and not easily moved by spin. Jamal gave her the full case files, every audit page, every suppressed report, the OSHA violations, the falsified invoices, with one condition. The story is about the workers, he said, not Ryan Hargrove's fall, not me, the people who got hurt and were told it didn't happen. She ran it front page, then followed with 3 additional features over the following weeks. The response was significant. Labor advocacy groups, legal aid organizations, community groups, Together they helped identify over 200 current and former workers who had been affected by Ryan's suppressed safety records. People who had filed complaints that disappeared, reported injuries that were officially denied, worked in conditions that violated standards Ryan had knowingly gutted to protect his quarterly numbers. Jamal authorized a settlement fund through Brooks Capital, not the minimum a legal team could defend, a fair number, one that accounted for medical costs, lost wages, and what it had actually meant to be injured on the job and told, institutionally, that your injury had never occurred. Wages at Hargrove Logistics increased 25% across the board. Safety inspections were reinstated and moved to an independent third-party firm. A permanent workplace safety compliance officer was brought on full-time and a workers' training and emergency fund was established. Built to help warehouse employees and their families with both immediate needs and longer-term skills development, Jamal named it after Earl Simmons, not after his uncle, not after himself. Earl had paid the longest price. The name was his. The fund's public announcement was held on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room at the new Brooks Holdings building. No press was allowed inside. The room was full of workers and their families, people in work clothes, people in their Sunday best, children sitting on parents' laps, folding chairs, a small podium, coffee from an urn in the corner that reminded Jamal, just slightly, of the break room on Fulton Industrial Boulevard. Earl Simmons stood up to speak. He was not a man given to public statements. He stood at the podium in a pressed shirt, his left shoulder still not entirely healed, and looked around the room for a moment before he found his words. "I've worked warehouse floors for 22 years, he said. I've had supervisors who learned my name and supervisors who only ever knew my badge number. I've had managers who treated a workplace injury like a liability problem." He stopped, gathered himself. "I never once had a boss come to my door on a Saturday, on his own time, and hand me an envelope because he thought what happened to me was wrong." He looked at Jamal across the room. "This man isn't just an executive. He's a brother." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was the kind that comes from people who mean it entirely. Jamal stood briefly. "I want to be honest with everyone in this room," he said. "I worked this floor, not long enough to know what 20 years of it feels like, but long enough to understand that the man driving the forklift and the man whose name is on the building are both necessary and both human. What's being done today isn't generosity. It's correction." He paused. "This is what was always owed by now." Kesha had been back at her mother's house in Marietta for nearly 2 months. The apartment was returned. Ryan's lawyers had made clear through formal correspondence that he intended to contest paternity and that she should expect no financial support from him. She was 7 months pregnant, doing most of the practical preparation alone, navigating the particular fatigue of a situation that was exactly as hard as it looked. She had stopped posting on social media entirely. She sat in her mother's kitchen most evenings after dinner while Miss Diane watched her evening programs in the other room and thought about choices, not abstractly, specifically, concretely, in the detailed way you think about something when the consequences of it are real and immediate and entirely your own to carry. She thought about the man who had sent her a family law referral through his attorney, who had not called to check whether she was using it, who had simply made it available and let her decide. She thought about what that said about him. And then she thought about what it said about her, that she had stood in a break room and told that man to his face that he wasn't worth what he was holding in his hand. When the people who built their lives on taking advantage of others finally lose everything, they don't just lose money or status. They lose the story they told themselves about who they were. And that story, it turns out, was the only thing holding the whole structure together. But justice was only the foundation. What Jamal built on top of it, for his daughter and for the community, is the part of the story that makes it worth telling at all. 6 months after the board meeting, on a Saturday morning in early spring, Jamal Brooks stood on the sidewalk in front of a building he had helped design. It wasn't a tower. It wasn't a monument to anything. 4 stories, clean lines, large windows, situated on Auburn Avenue in a neighborhood that had earned the kind of history worth honoring. A small bronze plaque beside the entrance read, "The Reginald Brooks Foundation, Building What Matters." His daughter was holding his hand. She had on her yellow rain boots. This was a phase. It had lasted 3 months now, and Jamal had long since decided that was a hill worth surrendering. She looked up at the building with the careful attention she gave to most things that seemed significant. "Is this ours?" she asked. "It belongs to a lot of people," he said. "We just help take care of it." She thought about this. Then, what does it do? He crouched down beside her so they were eye level. He pointed toward the entrance where a group of teenagers, 16, 17, backpacks and coffee cups in varying degrees of morning alertness, was filing in for a Saturday session. "A lot of those young people have parents who work hard for wages that don't always match how hard they work," he said. "This place teaches them about running a business, learning a trade, building something of their own, so they have more choices than their parents had." He paused. "And their parents had choices, too. They just didn't always get to use them." She watched the teenagers disappear inside. Then she looked at him. "Did you need something like this when you were little?" He smiled. "Yes, I did." She reached up with her free hand and patted his arm. The simple, unself-conscious comfort that only children are capable of. The kind that contains more warmth than most adults manage with a full paragraph. They went inside. That afternoon, Jamal composed a message he had been drafting in his head for 3 weeks. He had written and deleted the first sentence so many times that he'd finally stopped trying to make it elegant and simply said what was true. He transferred $50,000 into a dedicated account, documented, formal, nothing casual about the structure of it, and attached a note. He sent it to Keisha through Malcolm. The note read, "This is not forgiveness. I'm still working toward that, honestly and slowly, and I think that's the more truthful thing to say. This money is for our daughter, so she never has to feel ashamed standing next to her mother because her mother can't hold her head up. Whatever happened between us, she loves you. She should be able to do that without it costing her anything. J." Malcolm called within the hour. "You're certain?" "Yes." A pause. "Then, your uncle would have understood exactly why you did this." Jamal didn't respond to that directly. He just said, "Make sure it clears properly," and ended the call. Keisha read the note at her mother's kitchen table on a Thursday evening. The baby heavy and restless. The dinner dishes still soaking in the sink. She read it twice. Set it down. Sat very still. Her mother came in, saw her face, and pulled out a chair without saying anything. "He sent money," Keisha said. Miss Diane waited. "And a note." She pushed it across the table. Miss Diane read it slowly, folded her hands on top of it when she finished, and looked at her daughter with the particular patience of a woman who has earned the right to say, "I warned you," and has chosen, again, not to. "Mama," Keisha said quietly, "I let go of a genuinely good man." Miss Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What you do from here, how you raise this child, how you live your life going forward, that's still yours to write." Keisha nodded. The tears came, and she let them. There was no one left to compose herself for. The following Sunday, Jamal drove out to the house with the magnolia tree. His daughter ran up the front path ahead of him, already knowing exactly which porch step made the satisfying hollow thunk when you landed on it right. She pushed open the front door and headed directly to her boom. Not because she'd been told which one it was, but because she had known from the first visit. Jamal stood in the doorway and watched her arrange her stuffed animals on the window seat with the focused gravity of appositioning troops before a campaign. "Daddy," she said, not looking up. "When I grow up, can I help run the foundation?" He leaned against the door frame. You can do anything you decide to work for. She nodded, repositioned a stuffed elephant, moved on to the next item. He walked to the kitchen and stood at the window. The backyard magnolia was in full bloom, wide, white flowers against dark branches, extravagant and unhurried. His uncle had kept a magnolia in his Decatur yard. Jamal had noticed that when he was choosing this house. He hadn't mentioned it to anyone. He put the kettle on. He stood at the window and listened to his daughter talking quietly to her animals in the other room, assigning them roles in whatever story she was constructing. And he felt something he hadn't fully felt in a long time. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Not even particularly at peace. Because peace is not a permanent condition. It's something you return to over and over by choosing it. He just felt present. Here. In this house. With his daughter's voice down the hall, and the magnolia outside, and the kettle beginning its slow build toward a whistle. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. This story teaches us 3 things worth writing down. Not on a sticky note, but somewhere you'll actually find it again. Maybe the inside cover of the little notebook you keep by the reading chair. First, the people who demean others loudly are usually building on sand. Ryan needed an audience. Jamal needed a plan. One of those holds when the weather changes. Second, when someone you love is being overlooked, a son, a grandson, a good neighbor everyone seems to take for granted, the most useful thing you can do isn't tell him to be patient. It's to sit with him. Look him in the eye over a cup of coffee and say clearly, I see exactly who you are. Those words cost nothing and hold longer than any inheritance. Third, and this one is for you personally. If you have spent years quietly making a home, raising children, holding a family together while someone else got the credit, your worth was never in question. It was simply in the wrong room. Jamal's story is proof that the accounting always catches up eventually. Not always in 90 days. Sometimes it takes years. But it catches up. The next time you're sitting on the porch and you find yourself wondering whether the quiet, steady life you lived actually mattered, remember the man in the warehouse. Remember the envelope in the car. The most important things are almost always in the envelope everyone else almost threw away. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Written by a human. AI is merely a companion. This story was born to spread hope. Kindness doesn't need to be grand, only sincere. And life will always find a way to repay those who dare to be kind amid countless injustices.